Stay tuned for more information from Exodus 90 at the end of the video. I don't always dress like this, but I do sometimes, especially on Sundays and special occasions. It usually features fabrics like wool and tweed and other textures that are more ubiquitous at a certain place and a certain time that is less common than today. Another thing is my studio. It's designed in a kind of dark academia motif, at least to the degree that I could afford to design it that way. I have a pipe here that I like to smoke a pipe from time to time, but not this one. This one just sits here as a prop. I have leather-bound books in the background, and if someone wanted to, and they wouldn't be the first person to do it, they could accuse me of LARPing, of trad-LARPing. Which, if you're not familiar with that language, LARP is an acronym for live action roleplay. It's pretending to be something that you're not. Think of like medieval fairs where people dress up like knights or ladies of the court. It means you're pretending, you're dressing up in a costume and pretending to be something maybe as a form of escapism. So in the case of trad-LARPing, you're pretending it's the days of yore, and you're recovering some sort of traditional culture that you've romanticized in your mind as being unimpeachable. And of course, in your version of that fantasy, instead of being like a feudal subject or a farm worker, you've imagined that you're like an Oxford tutor with your pipe and your leather-bound books, and you're heavily steeped in classic literature. But the sad reality is you're actually just a modern public-schooled trousered ape, as C.S. Lewis liked to say, who only wished he had that kind of intellectual formation and high-cultured facility. And if you accuse me of any of those things, I would say, yeah, you're right. I am a LARPer. Much of my life is pretending to be something that I'm not. But I would add, I'm not only okay with that, I think that's what I should be doing because it's a good thing to do. Now, for the people who use that as a kind of first resort accusation for people that they don't like or that they disagree with, if by that they mean that a person is drawn to a particular philosophy or cultural movement simply because of the superficial externals that are attached to it, but not the aspects of it that are challenging and life-changing and costly, or the real substance of the philosophy behind it, they're only just dressing up and never really taking it seriously, well then yeah, I would agree that's obviously worthy of ridicule. So for example, the kind of people who talk about stoicism all the time, if they're always posting stoic quotes from people like Marcus Aurelius on social media, if they have Greek busts on their bookshelves, and they're always talking about how life is suffering and that's where you find meaning in it, but they don't actually deprive themselves of luxury or certain kinds of goods, it's all just appearance and branding to them, then yeah, I'd say that's lame. That's not cool. But if by LARPing you mean someone is pretending to be something that they're not because they actually admire it, they've bought into the movement, the philosophy, the culture, the way of life, and they're trying to embrace that whole standard and not just the appearance of it, then I'd say again, that's actually a good thing, as it is an apt description of a lot of what goes on in my own personal life. So why do I think that this is a good thing? Let me try to go back to another period in my life to build an analogy to something that might be a little more accessible from popular culture, because I grew up being fully immersed in skateboarding and skater culture. Avril Lavigne's Skater Boy was a song about me and my people. It defined my identity. Skateboarding did, not the song. And that whole phase of my life started when I was like 12 years old. And let me start off by saying that skateboarding is really, really hard to get good at. It's why not a lot of people persevere in it, because although something about it might, draw them in, whether it's the aesthetic or the subculture, or even being impressed by watching other people do it, as soon as they step on a skateboard and realize how hard it was, the infatuation can wear off really quickly, because it doesn't take long to realize that it's really dangerous and really hard to get good at. And for anyone who's honest about it, you realize it's going to take a really long time of me embarrassing myself, potentially in front of other people, before I even get remotely competent at it. And that was certainly true of my experience. When I first started skateboarding, I was terrible at it. I couldn't even do basic tricks. And if somebody came by and said, hey, do a kickflip.
Do a kickflip.
I had to face the shame of not being able to meet their demands, and this went on for a long, extended period of time. It took me a long time just to figure out how to do an ollie or a shove it, or to even just ride down the road and look like I was confident and comfortable, rather than terrified that at any minute I was going to break a limb. But that didn't stop me from identifying as a skater, from buying all the skateboarding brand name clothing, including skateboard shoes, which were the only kind of footwear that I would wear, no matter the occasion, to wearing the right fitting jeans, which had frayed edges on them. I wore my hair long, and I became fluent in an exclusive kind of vernacular and slang that was synonymous with skateboard culture. And I was able to name all the pro skaters that I looked up to whose style I would try to emulate. But adopting the identity of a skater boy was even more complicated than that, because if you didn't navigate the subculture absolutely perfectly, if you didn't quickly become proficient at using a skateboard, if you did anything like hold your board in the wrong way, you would be susceptible to the accusation of being a poser, which was the most terrifying word to a skateboarder. To be credibly accused of being a poser was devastating to your identity, because posers were people who liked to assume the identity of a skater, but didn't actually put in the effort, didn't make the sacrifices, and weren't there for the right reasons. They wanted all the benefit of identity and belonging and none of the responsibility. And the hallmark of a poser was that they couldn't actually skateboard well and didn't seem to be putting in the time and effort and the risks associated with getting good at it. And so this is the dilemma that every person who wants to get into skateboarding is faced with, because at the very beginning, for a long period of time, they're going to have to identify as a skater, be seen with a skateboard, but not be competent at the activity itself, and therefore susceptible to the accusation of being a poser. And yet the only way to get good enough to be immune to the accusation of being a poser is by surviving through a period of time in which you're not good enough to not be accused of that most fatal epithet. And so I persisted under this constant looming threat of enduring that accusation, and to whatever degree I could, being prepared to make a defense for the legitimacy of my inclusion, which was usually something like, "No way, man, you're a poser. I'm not a poser." Until eventually I turned around one day and I was actually good at skateboarding. When people would stop and say, "Hey man, do a kickflip," I would do a kickflip and I would land it. Actually, I vividly remember being out in front of my house practicing one day, which I would do for hours and hours on end. And one of the neighborhood dads was coming home from work. And as he was driving by, he stopped, rolled down the window, and I would say in a somewhat condescending tone, he said, "Hey, do a trick for me." So with several of my peers looking on in this high pressure situation, I did a kickflip. And his reaction implied that he thought that what he had witnessed was somehow like a glitch in the matrix, because I don't think he thought I was actually going to be able to do a trick. So he said, "Do that again." So then I did a varial kickflip, which is an even harder trick. And he looked at me like I had just done something supernatural, and then slowly rolled up the window and then went on his way. And it was in that moment that I knew nobody can ever call me a poser again. And here's the thing that experience, the experience of being a skater, taught me. If you want to become something that you're not, the first step is imitation. The first step is being a poser, whether you like it or not. And everybody who wants to grow in something does this. In fact, anyone who's educated has experience of this, because the process of education, of getting your backpack on for the first time and filling it with notepads and pencils and pens and protractors and rulers, is to suddenly embrace the identity of an educated person without yet being educated. You're pretending, you're going through the motions, you're going to classes and studying hard and listening and taking tests the way an educated person does without yet actually qualifying as educated yourself. We do this in sports as well, all the time. What is the thing that most people who are enrolled in any kind of sport spend the most of their time doing? Going to practice, right? And what is practice? It's pretending to be competent at the sport that you don't know how to do yet. You're practicing shooting baskets, you're passing the ball, you're running laps, you're doing all the kinds of things that real athletes do, but you're doing it clumsily. You're a poser at the end of the day. And that's the only way to become the thing that you're not. It's by pretending and rehearsing the actions of a person who is the thing that you want to become. You mimic the things that they do. You make it a habit of your life until one day you turn around and that process has changed you into the thing that you were just pretending to be. To become a fit person means to exercise in a way that a person who is fit does, whether you're fit or not. And generally, you're not fit at the beginning. You start, like lifting weights the way that a bodybuilder does. You start running laps the way that a runner does. You start doing cardio the way that a cardiologist does. even though you yourself don't have big muscles or can barely run or have a weak heart. And the last thing that someone doing these activities, embracing these kinds of regimens should do is be discouraged when some armchair critic is just sitting on the couch avoiding the difficult road of becoming something that they're not, calls you a poser or a LARPer. We shouldn't be discouraged by that. I look up to people like C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, who were formidable intellects, who were well-read and cultured, who smoked pipes and wore tweed and had big mustaches and talked eloquently, and who were also, in many respects, virtuous men that I look up to and admire. They embody the kind of man in certain measures that I want to be, and so what do? I practice being the thing that I'm not, in the hopes that in so doing, I will become that thing. Because if you want to become a virtuous person, this is what Aristotle, who is the master of virtue, says you have to do. You have to find people who embody the virtues that you want to develop yourself and then use them as inspiration. Not because simply being inspired by them will provide the transformational necessities, but because it gives you a tangible target to look to and to try to embody and practice yourself. And if you can habitually, repeatedly practice those characteristics, you will find that you will eventually start to inherit them yourself. So this is why I'm not bothered when people say, oh, you're just trad-LARPing. And at the end of the day, if it's true that I'm imitating a more aristocratic age or like a bourgeoisie identity, the converse is true of most everyone else who seem to be LARPing the proletarian identity. Take the fact that denim is the standard fabric for everyday wear, but why? Denim was invented for farm and factory work because of its rugged durability and functional design. But most people don't work in farms or factories, and even if they did, it wouldn't explain why they're wearing jeans at church or at the grocery store. It's a style that communicates working class identity, which is actually really ironic because if you looked at old pictures of industrial workers, factory workers, they were usually wearing trousers and vests and button-up collared shirts. Pretty much exactly what I'm wearing right now, minus the tie. Most of them dress better doing hard labor than most modern people do in our leisure time or even on special occasions. We're dressed up like we're about to do hard labor when we're about to do nothing. They dressed like they were going to go to a fancy restaurant by today's standard when they were doing hard labor. It's also worth pointing out that if LARPing is a vice, worthy of criticism, then what's the opposite virtue that is something that we should admire? Well, it would be authenticity, right? But that's not a classical virtue at all, and it's certainly not a Christian virtue. It's actually a virtue of the Enlightenment, defined by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed that human beings are inherently good by nature, and that it's the world that spoils us and produces our character defects. So out of our pure nature, we should disregard social conventions and embrace our true nature to protect ourselves from the nefarious influence of society. But this really doesn't account for human behavior and runs into all kinds of weird contradictions. Like, what if my dysfunctional self is my true self? And isn't it entirely redundant to embrace what you already are? It doesn't really make any sense. Why does somebody have to be told to just be what you are? If that's all you are, then it should automatically just permeate from your character. Especially if you consider, well, what if pretentiousness is my true self? What if LARPing is an example of me embracing my true nature? So that seems kind of self-refuting in view of what Rousseau had in mind when he talked about authenticity. Christianity instead recognizes that we are fallen and we need redemption, salvation, and sanctification, that we need to be transformed through the light of faith and through our cooperation with grace to become virtuous and holy, and to avoid vice so that we can keep the commandments of Christ. And the only way to do that is by looking up to the supreme model who is Christ himself. Look up to his teachings, look up to his example, and then as we practice it and as we fail over and over and over again, we should practice it some more and then fail over and over again until one day you start to actually live up to this standard that we all uphold and that he set for us. So if you're a Christian, I think we should refrain from using words like LARP in a disparaging way, unless it means people who are merely motivated by appearances and not the underlying beliefs that a particular aesthetic conveys. And even then, you never know how their attraction to a certain beauty in an aesthetic that is part of a cultural movement could be used by God to draw them into conversion. And I'd hate to be someone who discourages them away from that. We all want freedom. Freedom to speak, to think, to worship. But what about freedom to govern ourselves? Because in the absence of effort, we become the sum of our appetites, which is what the world wants, because the more you succumb to your appetites, the easier you are to manipulate. But true freedom is the freedom to do God's will. Freedom is becoming the man that God created us to be, men of worship, sacrifice, and love. And to achieve that kind of freedom, sometimes we need an exodus from the world, which is why this January, I invite you to join tens of thousands of men embarking on the Exodus 90 challenge, which is about growing deeper in your faith by training your body, your mind, and your soul through the power of asceticism in collaboration with a local brotherhood. Inspired by the Desert Fathers of the early church, it's helping tens of thousands of men from all around the world today. So if you're ready to take the first step, download the Exodus 90 app today and invite a few friends to join you to form a local fraternity. Just go to exodus90.com/Brian. Again, that's exodus90.com/Brian. You can join a brotherhood from all around the world for the Exodus 90 challenge, which begins on Monday, January 5th, to see if it's time for your exodus.